asks tough questions. She's not afraid to speak her mind. You've read her column. Maybe you're a fan on Facebook. No topic is off limits. Straight to the point. There's no chaser. You're now watching Straight Talk with Carla Zuill.
Welcome to another edition of Straight Talk. The recession is a topic that's on everyone's minds in Bermuda. Most importantly, when is it going to end? Well, with us in studio today, we have Mr. Craig Simmons, economist and Bermuda College lecturer. Mr. Simmons, welcome.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. You're welcome. Thank you for being here. Now, some may see you as the bearer of bad news, as you're the one that tells it as it is when it comes to Bermuda's economy. Tell us, Mr. Simmons, first of all, where did the interest in this topic come from? What made you decide to become an economist?
Well, I always wanted to teach, and I did play a little bit of music once upon a time, and I knew that I couldn't raise a family being a musician, so I had to find a way to make a living, honest living, and so economics seemed like a good way to go. So I studied economics and went to Bermuda College, and I've been there for at least 20 years.
Now, do you see yourself as a feared man as such in Bermuda?
Feared?
Mm-hmm.
I don't think so. I'm a simple guy from Somerset. Love to ride my pedal cycle to work. I don't think people should have any reason to fear me.
Well, fear in the sense of here lately, you seem to be the bearer of a lot of bad news, giving Bermuda a realistic and real snapshot of where our economy lies. Now, it's no secret that currently we're over $2 billion in debt. Mm-hmm. How, as a resident of Bermuda, how do we deal with that? Well,
it's interesting because depending on how you choose to look at Bermuda today, I think it will taint your outlook. For example, several years ago, I was the bearer of bad news. I talked about recession, and it was coming, and how things were not the way they were supposed to be. But in 2014, I think I'm more optimistic than most because, when was the last time you could buy a piece of property on Front Street for $1.2 million? Mm-hmm. And that's something that has happened within the last 12 to 14 months. So in many ways, this is a great time in Bermuda for entrepreneurs, for people that want to get into the property market, whether it be commercial or residential. So for me, this is now opportunity time. And if you get in now, you will in fact get ahead of the game. I think too often people are too cautious. Mm-hmm. They wait for other people to join in. Essentially, we're like cattle. We follow the herd. And in fact, following the herd is what got us into this trouble in the first place. I mean, the reason why someone would pay $1 million for a 3-bedroom condominium was because they thought that there were bigger fools out there who would buy it off of them for, say, $1.2 million. It wasn't that people necessarily thought that the property they were about to buy, was worth it. They just thought that they could exchange it for something better. Mm-hmm. But that was because you were following the herd. Your mother always tells you, just because everyone else is going to jump off the cliff, would you jump as well? Well, we need to remember that as adults. And right now, there's a lot of pessimism in the community that things are going down, and the economy is going to burn and destroy itself. Well, no, it's not. And again, times have never been better in terms of buying assets. Who would have thought 10 years ago that you would be able to buy shares in the Bank of Butterfield for about $1.50? You can do that. 10 years ago, they were costing over $20.
But how do you buy when there are some people who barely have enough to survive?
Well, there's a lesson. The lesson in that is that when we get back on our feet, and I'm going to underscore the when part. Mm-hmm. It's not if we get back on our feet, it's when. It's important that people put money away first, and in fact, get ready for the next time we get to this situation, because that will happen again as well. Mm-hmm. There were many, many years between the last recession and this one. The last recession ended in 1992, and of course this recession started in 2009. Imagine you had taken the perspective that As of 1992, I'm going to start saving, and I'm going to save, and I'm going to save, because I know that people are like cattle, and they are going to bid up property prices, and they're going to get themselves into difficulty. And when they get themselves into difficulty, the economy will tank, and when it tanks, that's when I'm going to step in. If someone had that state of mind in 1992, they would have been well placed to take advantage of the situation today. So when we get out of this recession, I would recommend to people, start saving. Get ready for the next recession. And you will be able to step up and buy a piece of property, say for $300,000. You will be able to buy many, many shares. But first you need to get yourself in position.
Now, you mentioned 2009, which wasn't too long ago. Could there have been any warning? I know you said that, recessions happen in time periods as such, but could there have been any sort of tangible warning? I recall 2008 or 7, and I don't remember any, and maybe I wasn't cognizant as I should have been, but I don't remember any warning saying a recession is coming. Is there a way of knowing?
Well, recessions don't happen on a regular basis. They're not like heartbeats, and recessions come out of nowhere. They're like hurricanes. You may have 3 years of perfect weather, and then all of a sudden in the 4th year you have this massive storm that decimates the island. And ordinarily with these hurricanes, after 3 years of no hurricanes, every time hurricane season comes around, you tend not to buy the new batteries, because it's like, well, last year there wasn't a hurricane. You tend not to keep candles on hand. You become lazy. Your view of risk tends to fall. Yeah. The year after a hurricane, everyone's got all the batteries, all the candles, they've got everything in place because they appreciate the risk so much. But when there isn't a hurricane, when there isn't a recession, you tend to get very comfortable, and you tend to take risks that you wouldn't ordinarily take. So you might only have $5,000 in the bank, but yet you're going to buy an $80,000 car because you believe that bonus that you got last year and the year before will continue for the next 3 to 5 years. It's hard for people to see into the future. In fact, it's impossible for people to see into the future. But unfortunately, we're like turkeys. We develop expectations of the future on what we see in the past. So for example, imagine a turkey in mid-November before Thanksgiving. Imagine you were a turkey and you said to your turkey friends, they're going to kill us. We're going to end up on someone's dinner plate. Well, all of those turkeys, the other turkeys are going to say, well, how could you say that? Every single day we've been fed, we've been nourished, we've been taken care of by the farmer and the butcher. They love us. They wouldn't do anything to harm us. Our children are going to school, they're doing extremely well, and the future looks bright. The future looks bright because the past looked bright. And that's the mistake that we make. Because there hadn't been a recession since 1992, of course, if you were born in 1995, all you knew were good times.
Right.
You couldn't possibly imagine what a recession looks like. And even if you had been born in the 70s, you forgot about the risks that happened before a recession, or the events that happened before a recession, or that when people become very comfortable, they become careless. And we became very careless in the 2000s. Very, very careless.
Okay.
And that careless attitude, that cavalier attitude to life is what got us into trouble. So we know it's going to happen again. I can guarantee it will happen again. The question is, will you be ready for when it does happen?
Okay. And on that note, we're going to take a break. We'll be right back with Mr. Craig Simmons. And we're back. With us in studio, we have Mr. Craig Simmons, economist and lecturer at the Bermuda College. Now, Mr. Simmons, before the break, you were talking about how people seem to get comfortable or may not recall the last recession. And so then when it falls upon us, many of us are ill prepared. Now, let's talk about this current recession. In light of you saying that it's not necessarily a predictable phenomenon, in the community, some people are saying that the government is the reason why we're in the recession, and some people are saying it's a worldwide trend. What would you attribute it to?
As with many phenomena. It's a combination of the two. To say that it's strictly the government's fault, totally the government's fault, is a bit of hyperbole. And similarly, to say that the government has no role to play, because the government did have a role to play in the recession. The truth lies somewhere in between. And to be quite honest, that's neither here nor there, because we're living now in 2014, and the government that was in play is now out of play. And it's more about how are we going to deal with where we are today, and what kinds of policies should the government put into place to sort of get us out of this recession. I think that's the better question as far as I'm concerned. The government's ability to affect the economy is always limited. Politicians are interesting creatures, because when the economy is doing very well, they want to take full credit for it. And I think we saw that in many of the budget statements during the 2000s. And when things are going badly, politicians become a little more honest and say, well, we have very little control over what's going on. And I think the truth is that politicians and the government has very little control. The people who have the control are the people. The folks that get up every day, go to work, entrepreneurs in particular, are vital to our economic prosperity. Those, I like to call them delusionally optimistic people. An entrepreneur can't be a pessimist. They have to see a bright future. They're also risk takers. And that's why I think we need to treasure our entrepreneurs. Quite frankly, I think the best entrepreneurs around are going to be the young people, because they don't have a lot of baggage. They also see the future very differently than people that look like me. And so I'm very big on young entrepreneurs. I'm big on young people, again, because they see the world a lot clearer than do old people. But coming back to sort of government, the government has made it quite clear, this new government, that they're going to exit from what's called a policy of stimulus. That is, they're going to concentrate more on reducing the debt. The problem with that is that if they're going to concentrate on reducing the debt, essentially they're going to reduce government spending. And the economy is already not in a good place. So they're going to be withdrawing whatever little spending they have. And that's going to have a negative impact, unless, of course, the private sector can kick in, unless entrepreneurs see opportunities and they create the jobs that are necessary to get the economy going again. That's a sort of a cloud on the horizon, a negative that has to be factored into any forecast.
Now, the U.S. was going through a recession, and we keep hearing reports that they're making their way out. Why is Bermuda taking a bit longer?
That's an excellent question, to which I don't have an answer, but as in most cases, when I don't know the answer, I answer a different question. The U.S. is unique in the sense that they have a great entrepreneurial spirit in the U.S. The American economy has traditionally been able to respond from a recession better than most economies on the planet. In fact, better than just about every economy. And there's something dynamic about the U.S. economy. Part of it has to do with the fact that Americans are an open society. They encourage immigration. The American economy takes in over 1 million people a year. And they don't have a problem with it. That's very interesting, because in Bermuda, there's an anti-foreigner vibe going on. We feel that foreigners are a necessary evil type of thing. But I'd like to suggest that we wouldn't be able to have this show if it weren't for foreigners, to the extent that all the equipment was made with foreign labor. The equipment comes from a foreign place, and we've got Bermudians, thank goodness, behind the scenes working it. But we've got to understand our place in the world. We are a very small island, one of the smallest places on the planet, and we're one of the most isolated places on the planet. I can only think of one other place that's more isolated than Bermuda. And so we are, out of necessity, more dependent on the outside world than the outside world is dependent on us. And so, we've got to figure out our way. Like, what exactly is our relationship with the outside world? To what extent do we need foreign capital? To what extent do we need foreign labor? I think once we can figure that out, I think prosperity will come sooner.
Now, you talk about this relationship with the outside world. many Bermudians, particularly females, seem to be emigrating to the UK, which means they're also removing themselves from the labor force. Does that have an impact that Bermudians are leaving Bermuda at a higher rate than ever? How does that impact the recession, if any?
Well, it has some beneficial effects because you've got people who were formerly unemployed leaving the island, going somewhere, getting a job, and I'm assuming they will be doing what many foreigners in Bermuda do, and that's send the money, or at least part of the money, back home. So they will be providing fresh income for the island. But you're right, we've lost what economists call a bit of human capital, because these ambitious people, because let's face it, the kind of people that emigrate tend to be the more ambitious types. So we're losing this ambitious woman, this ambitious man, and that's got to be a bad thing. But people have to do what they have to do. I'm guessing that when things get better, there'll be this flow back into Bermuda, and I think this recession will create or start out an ebb and a flow of Bermudian labor. Bermudians have always worked around the world. We've always lived in the U.S., in the Caribbean, in the U.K. You'll find us working everywhere. But I think this recession has brought it to the attention of many more Bermudians. And perhaps this is the beginning of a new reality, that Bermudians will have to go overseas to seek work from time to time, especially if you're a specialist. If you happen to have some specialization that's not needed in Bermuda, you really have no other choice but to go overseas. So I don't necessarily see it as a bad thing. There was a time in Bermuda where young people felt almost a right that when they come home there will be a job. The reality is that in Bermuda today there are not enough entry-level positions. Businesses aren't providing entry-level positions, enough entry-level positions. Businesses are looking for people who are already qualified. Yes. Now, when I came back from university, there were more entry-level positions than young Bermudians. Well, we've got to get used to the reality that reality changes, and it's a very different Bermuda today than existed in the 90s or the 80s. And rather than opine on how things used to be, we need to sit up, pay attention, and understand the ground upon which we sit. That's what I love about young people, because they tend not to opine about what it was like back in the 70s and the 60s, because they only know what's in front of them. On top of that, they're far more flexible. They're better able to deal with the changes that have come about.
Now, you talked about entrepreneurs, how they take risk and how opportunities are there for people who may want to attain properties, etc. But do you feel that a recession strengthens people? It shows them or teaches them how to survive?
Yes, to the extent that good times cause people to underprice risk. That's the way economists use it. Underpriced risk, what's a better way of saying it? It causes people to not pay attention to the risks that are out there, good times. In the same way that bad times cause people to overstress risks. Somewhere in there's a balance, there's an equilibrium. The biggest problem facing entrepreneurs today is the lack of credit, the lack of capital to start businesses. And I think that problem, that issue, falls squarely at the feet of the banking institutions. Because since the recession in 2009, the amount of credit, the amount of loans and advances that banks have supplied to the market has decreased. And if we go back to the previous recession that ended in 1992, one of the things that pulled us out of that recession was the amount of credit, the increase in the amount of credit that banks provided to entrepreneurs.
And after this break, we'll be talking to Mr. Simmons about inequality and the recession. So stay tuned for Straight Talk. We'll be back in a few moments. And then we'll just talk, Mr. Simmons, because that's what we were instructed to do. And we're back talking to Mr. Craig Simmons, economist and lecturer at the Bermuda College. Now, before the break, Mr. Simmons, we were talking about the banks freeing up more credit, basically, and offering more credit in order to create stimulus in the economy. Do you think that because Bermuda has moved away from local banks to international banks, that has an impact, that perhaps there's a disconnect of what's really needed in the community in which these banks are?
I think so. There's evidence to suggest when you look at the banking models that are used in the United Kingdom versus those that are used in Germany, the United Kingdom model is very similar to the Bermuda model. You have a few large banks that are sort of removed from the place where the loans are being given. And then you have the German situation, which is really the opposite, where you have many small community-based banks. And what we've noticed during the recession is that in the UK, those banks' behavior changed dramatically. They cut off credit. They were unresponsive to the needs of their communities. Whereas in the German situation, their banks remain strong. They were community-based banks. And the granting of credit is an interesting concept because the main driver of credit is information. When a bank makes a loan, its number one concern is, will that person pay the money back? And the only way I can know that is if I have a lot of information about that person. So if the people making these decisions are on the other side of the planet, they can't possibly know whether or not you, say, are a good credit risk. Whereas someone living in this community that sees you, that knows about your background, knows your family background, what exactly are you doing, those kinds of banking systems are more resilient, more robust than those rather impersonal large banking institutions. So we've gotten away from that community-based banking, which, as I said, in Germany has proven to be far better at surviving economic downturns.
Now, has this recession usurped or minimized our middle class?
It's not so much the recession. There's been a trend since the 80s, not only in Bermuda, but in the States, throughout the OECD, the European countries, and in the UK, where the degree of inequality has risen continuously to a level that hasn't been seen since the turn of the 20th century, during the days of the robber barons. That's the Carnegies and the Chases, and these rather unscrupulous business types. This would have been in the days before unions. So there was a lot of inequality then, the turn of the 20th century. And we're right back to that place now in 2014. Now there are several reasons for that. One is attributed to a race between education and technology. And in fact, there's been a very interesting book that came out in 2008 by two Harvard academics, one Claudia Golden and the other Lawrence Katz. And it's called The Race Between Education and Technology. So essentially, technology has been progressing at a rapid pace, but education hasn't been able to keep up with technological changes. And so those workers who are technologically skilled see their salaries rising, and those who are unskilled will see their salaries declining. And in Bermuda, we've seen that happen, that education has not been able to keep up with the pace of international business development, which is based on technological development. And so the solutions, unfortunately, aren't forthcoming overnight, because we're talking about improving the state of education, which we've been trying to do for quite some time. But it is rather disturbing that at this point in the 21st century, there is so much more inequality. And for an island like Bermuda, it can have significant political and social overtones. In the shorter term, one negative side of this, what I call maldistribution of income, is that those people with the financial resources have a disproportionate amount of political power. And so they can influence in a disproportionate way the political agenda when it comes to things like taxation, even when it comes to things like spending. So the economically powerful tend to have political influence. They can set the agenda, and so set the country up for even more inequality over the next 10 to 15 years.
Now, this current recession's been in existence for 5 years now. At what point, with its continuance, at what point do we panic and realize that, and you said that we are going to come out of it, but at what point have we reached a serious crisis or a catastrophe?
Well, I would liken us to going to cup match. Well, in my day, we went to cup match on a boat, and the boat would leave Watford Bridge. I'm a Somerset person, and you're going down the channel. You don't panic when you're on a boat. If there were a 50-foot shark going on the port side, the last thing you want is everyone panicking and running to the port side of the boat to see the shark, because we're going to all end up being someone's dinner. Economies are based to a large degree on confidence. It's more psychology than economics. Panic is not something that you want. Yeah? So that's the first thing. There is no reason to panic now. The foreign currency reserves of this country are still very strong. Inflation is still low. Unemployment is around 8% last year. More Bermudians were employed than in the previous year. So we are moving in the right direction, albeit at a snail's pace. So if there was a time to panic, it might have been last year. We have no reason to panic now. 2014 looks to be a turnaround year. I'm not going to suggest that the recession will be over in 2014. I've used the expression less bad. Things are definitely getting less bad, and it won't be too long before they start to get better.
What would be some indicators for the everyday man who may not understand the nuts and bolts of what a recession is?
There are a number of indicators. The easiest one for people to follow is the retail sales index. And the retail sales index is published on a monthly basis by the Department of Statistics. The most recent data we have is for December, several months ago. Now, the data coming out of that wasn't exactly what I was hoping for, because retail sales declined in December, year on year. So if you're comparing December 2012 to December 2013, the volume of sales was down by 3.4%. In November, it was up. I would like to suggest that 3 consecutive months of positive retail sales growth is a strong signal that the recession is over.
Now, let's turn to politics for a quick second in regards to the recession. Some have said that the current government has been using the $2.5 billion recession as a scare tactic. Do you think that that is the case?
Well, that wouldn't be a wise thing, because, as I said just now, economics is more about psychology. It's a state of mind. Whether or not I'm starving or whether I'm fasting is really a state of mind. Both instances involve me going without food. But if I'm doing it for my health, I might want to fast for 3 days or so. But if I'm doing it because I don't have food, we normally call that starvation. So it would be unwise, when I couldn't see a reason why a political party would get into scaring people, because people are already scared. They're living on the edge. I will say this, that what I see missing in the political domain is communication. And so we need to reach out, we need to talk, we need to understand that the person on the other side, we may not have the same political outlook, we may not have the same economic status, but unless you're willing to respect and appreciate that that's a human being you're dealing with, we're in trouble. There are 2 things in life that cause tremendous trauma to human beings. One is divorce, and the other is losing a job. So when firms are laying people off, they have to understand that that is inducing a lot of trauma, the same kind of trauma that they would deal with in the loss of a loved one. And so entrepreneurs, employers need to remember that, that before you start laying people over, you can't expect people to take that nicely. They're not going to take it laying down. People are going to respond in ways that might not be socially acceptable. But that's because trauma has been induced.
Right.
And so we need to be extremely cognizant. The government needs to be extremely aware that Bermuda residents are in fact living on edge, and we live in a complicated society. There are many non-Bermudians on island, and it doesn't take much for a Bermudian to want to take out their loss of job on a non-Bermudian. When I would like to suggest that the relationship between Bermudians and non-Bermudians is not a one or the other. It's both. There are not substitutes, they're complements, to the extent that when non-Bermudians jobs are being created, that creates jobs for Bermudians. It's not the case that non-Bermudians are taking Bermudians' jobs. But when Bermudians are losing their jobs, it's very easy for them to make that mistake.
And thank you for tuning in to another edition of Straight Talk. I'm your host, Carla Zuill, and I'll see you next week.
Are you on financial assistance but determined not to remain on it for the rest of your life? Then send us an email at talk@channel82.pm.
Thanks for watching Straight Talk with Carla Zuill.